Hello, everyone. I'm Ryan McGuire with Griswold Home Care, and we're going to start a series for family resources in the San Antonio area. And this is someone that I've known for a while now, a couple of years, but she has a really inspirational story and a great business that provides great service to families. And really, the point of this series is to introduce our families to other resources. That's one of our missions. And I'm excited to have Esther Piploy with Loss of Life Advocates, also known as LOLA, joining us today. So I just want to say hello to Esther.
Hey, Ryan, it's great to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for joining us. Like I said, tremendous business and tremendous story. And maybe that's a place that we can start, if you don't mind sharing, just kind of the genesis, the idea behind the business. You're the founder, so you started it yourself, and kind of come up with the idea and the concept. If you don't mind, just kind of starting, maybe first explain kind of what you do, and then how that idea evolved.
Oh, great. So I've been working on what do I do? What do I call myself? So the new three words are concierge grief consultant. Um,
Okay.
so that's kind of been the evolution of trying to figure out where I fit. But basically, in a nutshell, I work with families beforehand, getting them prepared, making sure they've got all their affairs in order. I have forms that I work through, business owners, families, organizations to make sure they've got everything in one spot so that in the event
Okay.
of a life transition, an illness, a diagnosis, COVID,
Yeah.
that people know how to keep running their business, their life, paying bills, making sure that things don't fall behind, who has access to banking, who has access to
Yeah.
making decisions for them. So that, and then we help during a life transition when somebody's been diagnosed with a major illness, cancer, it could be even COVID, what to do, how do we process through this, heart attack, stroke. And then after a loss, when somebody has passed away, we work with the family to close down the loved one's life. So death certificate distribution. We help some families get from the hospice company to the funeral home. So we do pricing. I walk cemeteries. So before, during, after is what we do. And I started
Okay.
my company in 2017.
Yeah.
Um, so I'm in my fifth year officially. And so it seems like it's been forever, but in some ways it's been like a blink. So yeah, so I started the company in 2017. My kids were strategic partners of mine on starting this out, like all good family businesses. And yeah, it's the reason I started it was because I lost my husband and my dad in 2014, 63 days apart. And
Yeah.
people think, wow, and now in our days with COVID, I mean, I'm hearing from so many families that are losing multiple loved ones, even closer
Yeah.
together. And so I know that it's unique in itself, but that motivated me from not knowing where things were, knowing my dad was perfectly planned, had everything in order. My husband owned his own law practice here in San Antonio. We had a home together. I'd taken a job in Denver, Colorado. We were in the middle of transitioning up to live there. But when he passed away so suddenly, after a cancer diagnosis, I realized during that period of time that there was really nobody to tell me and guide me what to do first, how to do it.
Yeah.
There's a lot of grief people that are around, that therapists and the funeral homes have their own grief programs. The hospice companies have grief services, but there's really nobody to say, okay, we need to open the mail because you haven't opened the mail in 6 months, and we need to look
Yeah.
at mortgage. Like, do is your name on the mortgage? Do we need to take your husband's name off? Do we need to report to BCAD, Bear County Appraisal District, to take the name off the title of the house? So it's all those little details that kind of hit people. Unfortunately, the biggest one is the bank. So
Yeah.
walking people through all those processes. So that's kind of was the impetus for me starting. And because I was already kind of in the insurance world prior to that, I was used to helping people. And so it just kind of was a nice way of kind of combining all of my experience from personal experience as
Yeah.
well as my career in insurance, and being able to say I think this is a need. And it's been hard to explain to people because even we met the first time, you were like, what do you do, so
Yeah.
people are learning about it. And now I've certified advocates that do what I do. They get trained to do it, and they're helping people in the universe. And that's kind of the nutshell of what we do.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, with any kind of new concept, the first step is really the education piece on exactly what you're doing and how you can help. And that's, part of the crossover benefit of maybe this interview series as well. Um, so is there something that you see like commonly, like a big mistake or something, not necessarily a mistake or something that's not planned for that you commonly see that maybe people can address, or, advice that you give them?
Yeah, the biggest piece of advice is, obviously people are like, get your will done, get your paperwork in order.
Yeah.
What people don't tell you or professionals don't tell you is that when somebody passes away, if they have a will and they own property and there's going to have to be transfer of, deeds and titles and all kinds of stuff, they own a
Yeah.
business and you're not on the banking, you have to go through probate court. Now, depending on where, if you have less than $75,000 in assets, then you probably fall under a small estate. And that's kind of one thing that attorneys do a great job of walking you through this probate process, whether you have a
Yeah.
will or you don't have a will. But that price tag to work with an attorney can range anywhere from $1,800 to probate, if it's a very simple probate, all the way up to three, five, and I've heard $20,000 depending on the extent
Wow.
of the estate.
Yeah.
And so if you don't leave the executor or whoever's appointed to take care of your finances and close down things for you, a bank account with money set up into it, whether it's a life insurance policy or something, um, that in itself is kind of setting you up for failure because families will come and say, well, we have the will and we have this. And I'm like, okay, now you need to go to a probate attorney. And they're,
Yeah.
it's that. And I'm like, oh, and it's going to cost you about this much. And then they're like, well, where are we supposed to get that money? And so that's been a big hiccup, I think, for families because banking, if they can't get into bank accounts, the banks aren't going to let them just walk in with a death certificate unless you're a POD, a payment on death, on the account, if you're
Yeah.
not joint. So that to me is one of the biggest hiccups I encounter that families just tend to want to give up. I had a family this last year that the uncle died, brother-in-law, and he had $8,000 or $5,000 in his bank account, um, but it was going to cost him $3,000 to probate to get the 5,000. So
Yeah.
the sister was like, you know what, we're just going to walk away.
Yeah.
I'm not going to do it because he didn't have well, he had children, but they were all minors. And
Okay.
so, one day it'll go into that state find me fund, and the
Yeah.
kids will be over 18, and somebody can maybe claim it at that point. But they were like, to go to probate, he didn't have anything. He lived in an apartment. He had a car, and we just turned it back in. And uh,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And social media is a big one too. So not having
And
anybody signed up.
yeah. And does that even go for like a spouse as well? If one spouse has their own bank account under their own name, is it the same?
Yeah, it is. And so if you don't have a joint account, or somebody, on the account with you, and I
Yeah.
always tell like elderly families, like if you've got mom and dad, and then you should always have at least a third person. So whether it's a child or somebody you trust on that account, because let's just say, dad goes into the hospital, mom's going to be with dad. So if mom's like, I need you to go to the bank to do this, if you don't have that third person on the account, you could again fall into some pretty gray areas. And I've heard of, right now spouses that die simultaneously,
Right.
especially with COVID, you've got one person that gets it, then the spouse gets it because they live together, and then the banking's kind of a mess. But yeah, I mean, having a second or even third person on the account is really important.
Yeah. And I think you're right. I mean, yeah, talking about spouses passing away together because of COVID. Um, I mean, seems like, yeah, definitely a high risk of that. I'm sure it's a common occurrence this year. And how have families been handling the funeral arrangements and things like that in this kind of pandemic time? I know my grandma passed away this year, and we haven't been able to do any memorial service and that affects kind of the grieving process and the closure. Have you seen that with your own families? Have they come up, or do you have a recommendation or solution?
I mean, I think it's super important for families first to have the conversation. Like, if something happens to me, right? We're not
Uh,
even dealing with pre-COVID, pre-COVID times now with funeral homes. They've got so many different protocols. I'm finding that a lot of families, when they encounter this, they either kind of fall into two categories. One that's like, we're going to do something regardless. Like we're going to work
Yeah.
with the funeral home to try to have some type of service, whether it's 10 people and then, Zoom or video or FaceTime,
Yeah.
into the services. Or you have the other side of it, which people are, I'm getting my loved one cremated. And then when things, open up, we'll do a celebration of life.
Yeah.
Because they're so traumatized, because a lot of families that go through COVID, if the loved one's been in the hospital, they're exhausted.
Yeah.
They have been rooting and fighting and trying to, overcome the communication barriers, um,
Yeah.
the facilities of not being able to be there. So I think that all of that takes such a toll that at the end, they're just they're grieving, and I feel like we have this new cohort of people that are going to come out of, that when we come out of this bubble of COVID and we hopefully find a solution for it and the immunizations are working and we get back into what semi new normal times.
Yeah.
um, I think families, that whole cohort that's gone through this is just, it's PTSD,
Yeah.
because I'm even finding families now that, employers that call and say, my employee won't get on, won't get on Zoom. And I'm like, well, they watched their loved one pass away on Zoom. So you've
Yeah.
got
Wow.
all these new things that are happening with hospitals,
Yeah.
FaceTime, Zoom. And so families, the PTSD from that is definitely a little crazy. From the funeral home standpoint, I will say that, I work with, Dignity here in San Antonio, Sunset Funeral Home off Austin Highway is one of my partners, and they
Okay.
kind of give me updates every once in a while. So they'll say, hey, we're not doing they used to do ID, kind of an ID viewing for families to let them go in and ID their loved one, and now they're not doing that.
Yeah.
They've
Wow.
decided to stop that type of service. Cremations are about 14 days out, depending on when they can get all the permits. So that's another delay that families are having to wait. It's, the process of watching having somebody die and then having to wait 14 days. So there's a lot of the, do we have a service without the body? Do we
Yeah.
wait? So they're experiencing that. The cemeteries are just, they're busy, so everybody in that industry, but they're also encountering their own systems of COVID. They're all
Yeah.
going through it at the same time. So the funeral directors have their hands full of really trying to provide the level of service that they want to provide families with that during that really crazy, sad time, but also trying to be prepared and, be honoring the loved
Sure.
one that passed away. So yeah, I think families are, there's going to be a whole group of people come out that's got PTSD.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Gosh. Yeah. It's been a hard year for everybody, and I'm sure that you see that kind of on a day to day, just in the nature of your business. So is there something that people, clients, or potential clients, maybe prospects, have a misunderstanding, common misconception maybe about your business, what you do, anything like that you want to kind of clear up for people?
Yeah, one of the things that, people ask me, are you a nonprofit? And I've thought about it. When I started the company, I was like, do I go nonprofit? Do I go for
Sure.
profit? And then I just finally had to tell myself, well, my husband died. He was my for-profit moneymaker. He was a lawyer.
Yeah.
I'm a for-profit company. However, for every package that's purchased from us, we donate hours to families that can't afford us. So when
Yeah.
somebody come through or there's a referral, hey, I've got a family that probably can't afford this. We try to give back to the community in ways that we can. I received a grant from the Bear County, grants that they were handing out last year in the summer.
Great.
And so I used a lot of that money to try to help families and give services, as I could for free, in trying to support families that were just lost. So that's really the biggest misconception, that people are like, oh, are you a nonprofit? Or they'll come to me thinking I have grant money for them to help with burial
Yeah.
expenses. Like, you know what, I can get you to resources and do the workaround on that, for you. And sometimes, if they, it's like anything. You just like, you want to take out your checkbook. I have my kids like,
Yeah.
it's like slamming it on me. No, mom, you can't help everybody. But,
Yeah.
there's cases that we certainly look into. But yeah, people at the very beginning were like, oh, you're a nonprofit. And I'm like, no, my husband died. I'm for profit.
Yeah. For
Yeah.
sure. Okay, that's great. And gosh, thinking back now, so it's been like say 5 years since you started the company. Has there been a surprise for you of something, maybe it's a service that you've added on, or just something, that you didn't anticipate kind of doing or experiencing with the nature of the business?
Yeah. So this last year, I received, my first, and I'm going to just kind of title it property and casualty. case, because I have a friend that lives in Fredericksburg, and he had heard about, he knew my business. Everybody that knows me was like, "Oh, you're starting your own company."
Yeah.
So what do you do? "Oh, that's so depressing." And I'm like, "Oh, thank you for the word of encouragement, but oh, no, no, we're supporting you." But he actually called me one day. It was back in September 29th to be exact, September
Mhm.
28th, 29th. And he was sitting on an airplane, and he said, "Hey, he's from Mount Anacortes, Washington. Basically, his family's
Okay.
lives in Washington State." And he said, my mom and my sister, they have a home together, and the house tried to burn down. And my nephew, I lost one of my nephews who was a twin
Oh,
in
wow.
the fire, and our family pet. I'm on a plane. I would like to FaceTime you in with all of us, or at least do a conference call. And I was in my storage unit, walked outside, took the call, was introduced, and I knew his mom and his sisters, but didn't know him
Yeah.
this way. I knew him from a wedding, when they got married.
Yeah.
My girlfriend married him, and he was like, "I don't want anybody talking to anybody. They all go through Esther." So I immediately got my contract and sent it to get DocuSign so they could all, I could represent them. So I really started, I was talking to the coroner's office, the funeral home, investigators, dealing with farmers insurance, and farmers had 5 different adjusters on the
Oh,
case immediately. So I was the frontline representative for the family, so that the uncle just knew, his mom and his sisters just didn't need, they had
yeah.
a child that had been in the fire. They had a twin that was a surviving twin. So they had a lot of family things they needed to take care of.
Yeah.
And me not being emotional about it, of course, it was very touching to me, and it's still sad to me. I was able to at least represent them from the family side on the business side, and walk them through, okay, here's what we need to do, and get back and forth and be that communication pipeline for them. So
Yeah.
that's something I definitely didn't see myself doing. And now we're into the inventory of the house. Like, we're doing calls with farmers now. We're going through, what's the cost going to be to replace the house, and does it make sense to rebuild. And then the items that are in the house, I tell people, like, turn around in your house and look behind you, or look it to the left, and if you have bookshelves, imagine losing everything, and then
Yeah.
having to put it into a spreadsheet room by room for an insurance company to reimburse you for contents. So I'm helping them with all the spreadsheet, and the cost on the rebuild. So it's definitely taken me in a different direction. And also, I
Yeah.
really, in the beginning, I could not help families outside of San Antonio. I felt like I was kind of needed to be here, needed to
Yeah.
hold their hands. And this was the first one that I was like, you know what? I did everything 100% via phone. Having the right tools helps,
Yeah.
definitely Zoom and conference calling and a DocuSign account,
Yeah.
because you'd be surprised how many people want things signed.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so it's been, yeah, definitely, that was next last year that took me in to an area where I knew enough, because I was in the insurance industry, to be able to represent them, but also um, went into a different area. It was more tragic, and so
Yeah.
now when something happens, it's not just a loss through a medical condition. Now it can be a loss through a car accident,
Yeah.
or it can be a loss through, a house fire. And knowing that I can come in and help them take care of that is probably the most eye awakening thing last year that I learned.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think that's one of the great services that you provide. I mean, allowing the family to mourn without having to worry about dealing with insurance, all those types of things. I mean, that's one of the things we talk about as well, that our caregivers can provide. We allow the family to stay family, and they're not having to do some of the personal care items that might be uncomfortable during the last stages of life, but really allow them to maintain their relationship, and remember their parents like they have always known them.
Right.
So that's a great service. I think what you do is tremendous. You really have a heart for it, and the compassion that really goes along. That I guess because you've lived it and experienced it, and you know the need that's out there. So how can people connect with you, Esther?
Oh, sure. You can go to my website at lossoflifeadvocates.com,
Okay.
or call me at 210-802-2224, or email at info at lossoflifeadvocates.com.
Okay.
And
Very
also,
good.
we're both partners with ACOG.
Yeah.
So, if somebody
Absolutely.
goes to ACOG, our both of our services, or, we have a great partnership with them. They can provide, we can have our services provided in education for what you do and helping families. And then what we do. ACOG provides that for our caregivers
Yeah.
um, in 13 counties, right? Or
Yeah,
about.
it is. Absolutely. And we'll put all that information in like in the comments or on the website. If we put on you find it on YouTube, it'll be on kind of the YouTube description or on the website. So they'll be able to connect with you. But thank you so much for joining us today. It's been great. It's great to see you via Zoom. Hopefully in the future we'll be able to see each other in person. But
Yeah.
thanks again, Esther.
Thank you. I really appreciate it, Ryan.